What's up, EV Clan? Alex Espion here, and welcome back to the Pokemon Red Randomizer Nuzlocke, where in today's episode we are on Run 7, and we are taking the precautions necessary to continue on through Viridian Forest and hopefully beat Puder City Gym. So, basically, previously I said about how I didn't like Odyssey very much, Super Mario Odyssey, in a previous episode. And so, I think that since it's gonna be kind of like a boring grinding episode, I might as well fill it with a little bit of context, just some commentary to entertain y'all. And I feel like this is a conversation topic because Odyssey, a lot of people really like Odyssey, I feel. But I guess I'll just explain in more detail why I don't. So, first off, I think that the lack of lives is a good idea, but I think that if you are not going to include lives in a game, there shouldn't be like any punishment at all, you know? Like, I think that from the and like other punishments are fine besides lives for dying. Like, there are some games I'm sure that do it like okay, like it's not a life counter, but there are still like consequences for dying. And I think that, like, games should always have pretty much consequences for dying, unless, like, big consequences for dying, like major ones, unless it's like a really hard game. And I feel like the low difficulty of Odyssey doesn't warrant such a tame punishment as just simply taking away some of your coins. I feel like the punishment should be more severe, or there shouldn't be a punishment at all, because taking away a couple coins doesn't really, it doesn't really matter. Like, especially with how little it takes away. I think it takes away, like, only 10, and it's like, you can get that back so quickly. You could literally just run into a couple bushes, and then you're fine. You have all that back. So it's like, I don't really see the point to the punishment at all. And another thing about Odyssey that is just, I don't particularly like the Brutals, and I know a bunch of people are like, oh yeah, it's refreshing, it's a little mix-up from the Koopalings, but it's like, is it really that different? Like, and I would rather have bosses that actually make sense. Like, the Brutals just caught me off guard, and I don't think it was really in a good way. I'm like, why are his wedding planners bunnies? It just didn't make much sense to me, and I get that that's sort of like the surprise factor of it, and hey, maybe you like that, maybe you like that it's so, like, random, but it definitely doesn't make sense to me, like, all their, like, powers and just, like, their branding, like, oh, these are bunnies with, like, hats that are used for combat. It's, like, it's very strange. Like, even the main mechanic of the game, where you're, like, using hats for combat, like, Bowser has a hat with boxing gloves, and you have a hat that, like, possesses things. I think that is very cool, and I'm sure it's based off of some, like, Japanese mythology or, like, yokai or something, like a hat that possesses people. That sounds like some kind of yokai mythology or something like that. It sounds like that. So I'm sure the idea did come from somewhere, but just, like, and I don't mind Cappy so much because I think it is an interesting idea for a mechanic, and I think it is a really interesting idea just for a game in general to have Mario, like, becoming the enemies for once. And I think that it is, like, really charming that the enemies get the mustache, but, yeah, I think that, like, Bowser having a hat with boxing gloves was a little too much for me personally. Like, I didn't really like that, because it's just like, Bowser is so strong already. It's like, he has his tail, he has this strength, he has fire. It's like, why does he need a hat with boxing gloves? It just didn't make sense why his tuxedo would come with boxing gloves to me. And also the hat moves by itself, which is like, which is weird to me, because like, he throws it, right? So you think it would be like, oh yeah, it's just a hat, because unlike Cappy and Tiara, I believe is the name of his sister, but unlike Cappy and Tiara, Bowser's hat, which I dubbed Flappy during my playthrough, because I thought that was funny, because it's like Cappy, but it's Bowser, so it's Flappy. Flappy does not have a face. He does not have eyes. I'll assume it's a he, because that's just how, Nintendo seems to do it. Mario has a male hat, Peach has a female crown, Bowser then would stand to reason would have a male hat. So I'll just say that Bowser's hat is called Flappy, and Flappy is a boy. Even though, I guess the gender of the hat doesn't really matter. But it stands to reason that since Flappy doesn't have a face, that Flappy isn't even alive. But the fact that, like, Bowser throws it, and then it, like, arcs in directions that definitely aren't natural, seems to prove otherwise. And so I don't get the whole... I don't get why he has a hat, and why, like, that's... I don't know. It just seems like such an odd thing to give him a hat, but not have it, like, have such a different ability to yours. And it's not just like a hat that, like, floats around, like a hat ghost like yours. It's one with boxing gloves. It's like, that's so weird, because Bowser has never been associated with, like, boxing. If it was like a hat that had, like went into a shell or something like that, that would be like, that would make sense. If it was like a shell, a shelmet, if he had a shelmet, that would make sense. Some sort of a shelmet, because obviously, like, in Mario Maker, they have, like, the shelmets where you, like, kill the beetle and then you, like, put it on as a helmet. I don't think that's how it works, actually. I don't think you can kill the beetle and then put its shell on as a helmet. I think it has to be, like, a separate type of helmet. I think you have to, like, shake the beetle for it to become, a shelmet. And then, obviously, in Super Mario Maker 2, they had, like, the dry bone shell, which is, like, the opposite of a helmet. That one you wear on your feet. I guess you don't really wear it, you just sort of, like, sail around in it. It works as, like, a boat across lava. I think that's a really interesting idea. I do like the shellmets from Mario Maker. And, like, I love the Buzzy Beetle one, I love the Spiny one, and I love the addition of the Dry Bones one in Super Mario Maker 2 that allows you to go over the lava. Because, I don't know, I feel like we've never, like, really seen something like that in 2D Mario. In 3D Mario, we had, like, Mario Galaxy's Ice Flower, which I think is really sick. Like, Mario Galaxy, obviously it's very different from the 3D Mario games before it. And some people don't like it because it's, like, too linear. They feel it's, like, a little bit too close to, like, the 2D games. But I absolutely love Galaxy. I think, and it's, like, yes, unlike the previous games, it does have, like, the power-ups, because, like, Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine obviously didn't have, like, traditional Mario power-ups. Like, Super Mario 64 DS had the mushroom, had, like, the super mushroom. I don't know if the original Mario 64 had a super mushroom. I don't think it did. But I think that the super mushroom was sort of, like, and my brother says it was a mega mushroom, but I remember it just looking like a super mushroom, and while it does work effectively like a super mushroom, like a mega mushroom, like, Mario 64, Mario is already, like, Super Mario size, I guess, because he's, like, double the size of a Goomba, and that's usually the size of Super Mario. So, you would think that he's already Super Mario, since he's already Super Mario, and he doesn't take... It's not like the 2D games, right? Super Mario 64, because he's already Super Mario the minute you enter the level, and much like in, like, 3D World, except, obviously, 3D World and 3D Land are, like, made after the 2D games. They are supposed to be like the 2D games. Meanwhile, the old 3D games just aren't like the 2D games, so Mario, instead of, like, taking damage and slowly losing power-ups, it's like, okay, he's a Fire Flower, he takes damage, he goes down to Super Mushroom. He takes damage again, he goes down to just regular Mario. Instead of that, they have, like, health circles, like a health meter. It's not really a meter in Super Mario 64 or, like, Super Mario Sunshine or anything, but, like, it's like a circle, and then it has, like, segments that they lose. And they kept that in Super Mario Galaxy, but what I think is so interesting about Super Mario Galaxy is that, like, power-ups do not work the same way as in, like, regular Mario. So, like, the Fire Flower is in it, you know, but it's not like, oh, you get hit, you lose the Fire Flower. No, it's a time thing, because they have to stay with the 3D Mario rule of, like, oh yeah, the amount of power-ups he gets does not, his power-ups don't determine his life, like how many hits he can take, because that's a 2D Mario thing. So the fact that Super Mario Galaxy, like, mixed it up and said, like, hey, Fire Flower's in this, but that doesn't give him an extra hit, like, it's still determined by health meter, it's just, like, he runs out of time on it, is very good. Like, I really like that, and I like that they did both Fire Flower and Ice Flower in Super Mario Galaxy. Because I don't know when Ice Flower came out, but I don't think that it was Super Mario Galaxy was the first game with Ice Flower. I think that Ice Flower was New Super Mario Bros. Wii, although I could be wrong. I feel like its first appearance was, like, pretty obscure. Like, I feel like there was an appearance before that. There was, like, an obscure one, but I feel like that was its first main appearance. And I think that New Super Mario Bros. Wii might have come before Super Mario Galaxy. That would make sense to me, because, New Super Mario Bros. Wii just, like, it feels like I think that Nintendo likes to do that better, like, put the 2D game on the console, put the 2D Mario game on the console first, and then, like, build it so they can build hype for Mario, and then, like, everybody's waiting for the next 3D game, right? Like, everybody loves 2D Mario. I actually kind of prefer 2D Mario, but, like, the 3D Mario games are just more hype, you know, because, like, the 2D Mario games are pretty much all the same, and especially after, like, especially, like, the New Super Mario Bros. Era, like, the previous ones, like, the original trilogy were all quite different from one another, but in terms of New Super Mario Bros., yeah, all of the 2D Mario games in that period were kind of the same. So, therefore, the 3D Mario games that came out during that period were just more hype, because, like, everyone was different. And I will say that, like, Super Mario Galaxy 2, you can already see Mario, like, starting to get into this trap of, like, just do the same thing over and over again, and I'm sure people don't mind if you don't innovate very much. Because you see, like, as the series went on, they just got less and less innovative. They're like, New Super Mario Bros. Again, let's do another New Super Mario Bros. Game. How about another one? And then, like, Super Mario Galaxy did really well, let's do Super Mario Galaxy 2. And I think that is, like, the start of that, like, lack of innovation that has been in more recent Mario games. Been present in, like, the main idea of more recent Mario games, in fact. And I think that Super Mario Odyssey, going back to Super Mario Odyssey, I think that Super Mario Odyssey does sort of fix that problem a little bit by introducing this new mechanic of, like, using throwing a cap at things to possess them, because that is really something interesting that we've never seen before in Mario, and it allows for, like, a repeat of gimmicks that we've seen before, but in, like, a new style. Like, it's like Super Mario Galaxy had its own gimmick, like, a new gimmick, but it wasn't really a new gimmick, you know? Like, the spin jump had been a thing in Mario games before. It's just, like, now in Super Mario Galaxy, they're like, okay, let's, like, if you, like, shake the controller, then you spin. And I think that is, like, a nice way of innovating on it, but at its core, it's still just like, oh, you spin in the air. Like, that's your new ability for this game. And it's not like that hadn't been done before. And hey, maybe it had been. Maybe Super Mario Galaxy did come before New Super Mario Bros. Wii, but I don't think it did. I'll have to look that up after recording, and I'm sure while editing this, I'm gonna look it up, and I'm gonna be like, Alex, you are so dumb. Why did you say that? You're completely wrong. This entire conversation, the principle on which you built this entire conversation topic is wrong. Super Mario Galaxy came first, and the mechanic is completely new. Maybe that's what I'm gonna say while editing this. But, for now, I'm just gonna say, I think that New Super Mario Bros. Wii came first, and so I think that the Super Mario Galaxy mechanic of like, spinning in the air wasn't that new and fresh. But then again, I will say, like, the whole gravity thing definitely does give it a new spin that is, like, nothing like what we've seen before. Absolutely. It's like Mario's gimmick. Like, Mario hadn't been given any, like, new movement gimmicks for Super Mario Galaxy, I don't think, really. But in terms of, like, actual gameplay gimmicks, like, yeah, their whole gravity system in Super Mario Galaxy is a pretty big one. And I think that and I hear often that people complain about, like, getting sick from watching Super Mario Galaxy and, like, playing Super Mario Galaxy. But I absolutely love the gravity system, and I can see why people might get sick. Personally, it doesn't bug me. I know that, like, I had this one YouTuber, I know that he said that it didn't bother him as a kid, but now it does. And so, hey, maybe when I look back at it, later in my life, I'll be like, wow, this is terrible, how did I ever play this? But for now, at least, I'm fine with Super Mario Galaxy. The gravity system doesn't make me want to throw up just yet, which is good. Because it allows me to appreciate the game all that much more when I'm not on the verge of throwing up constantly. It really does take away from the fun of the game, I think, when you just feel like you're gonna hurl at any given second. But, yeah, obviously Super Mario 64 did that before, where it was like, oh yeah, power-ups are timed, because we don't want it to work like the same way as 2D Mario, where it's like, oh yeah, you get hit with Metal Mario, you lose the metal power-up, because in a way it couldn't work like that, because the Metal Mario power-up is effectively a star. So, obviously, they had to make it work like a star, in the way that, like, you can't get hit with it, so therefore you can't lose the power-up by getting hit with it. So, what other way could they make you lose it, besides time running out? So that is what they did with the Metal Mario power-up, and I don't know if that much thought was put into it, like, oh, we can't make it like other power-ups, we gotta make it like the Superstar because it makes you invincible like the Superstar. I don't know if that much thought was put into it by Nintendo, but it does definitely work out as, like, a reason for not making it a you get hit, you die, you get hit, you lose it power-up, and instead making it a timed power-up. And I don't know if that's what they were thinking, because Vanish Cap and Metal Cap, I think, are the two power-ups in the game, and they both make you invincible, I believe. But Wing Cap is also in that game, and Wing Cap doesn't make you invincible, so it all depends on what they thought of first, I guess. Like, maybe they thought of Wing Cap first as a power-up, and so they just wanted to mix it up with the timer mechanic, like, because if you lost Wing Cap by getting hurt, then I think that wouldn't have made so much of a difference in the way it's used, in its use and how the gameplay of it. But I think that hey, so the way I see it, there are like two possibilities. Either they came up with like Metal Cap or Vanish Cap first, and they were like, oh yeah, we can't do the get hit thing with this, and we can't do like the get hit, you lose the power-up thing with this, because you can't get hit with this, so we gotta do it like the Star, where it just time runs out. And so, after that, they were like, okay, well we did it with the other power-ups, let's do it with this one too, and so they made the Wing Cap a power-up that goes away with time. Or they did like, the Wing Cap, or they did the Wing Cap first, and they were like, okay, let's innovate. Like, perhaps it wasn't the time getting rid of the power-up wasn't made out of a necessity, but rather just to mix it up. So perhaps it was just the Wing Cap was made first, and they were like, let's, instead of making you take damage to lose it, let's make it so you lose it with time. Like, perhaps that's what, and then they were like, okay, but if you lose power-ups with time in this game, then that enables us to do power-ups like the Superstar that make you invincible. Like, maybe that's what came first. Like, it all depends on what idea came first, really. Like, what did they think of first? Did they think of the power-ups that needed to be taken away by time, which caused them to come up with this power-ups taken away by time mechanic? Or did they come up with the ability to take did they come up with the idea that power-ups would be taken away by time, which allowed them to come up with these new power-ups that allowed you to not take damage for a certain amount of time? Like, I don't think it really matters, but it is just, like, I am just, like, picking apart, like, how this came into existence, because this is how Mario 64 and future 3D Mario games would work, up until 3D World. 3D Land. And, I do think it is really interesting that, like, I do think it's really good that they, like, kept with it for as long as they did. I don't think that Super Mario Sunshine had any power-ups, per se, so I don't think, like, the power-ups lost by time was a factor in Super Mario Sunshine. But I'm glad that, like, Super Mario Galaxy, they put these power-ups in and kept that 3D Mario mechanic of power-ups running out by time rather than taking damage, because it's like, yeah, the Fire Flower's in this game now, but it still works like 3D Mario. And I think that that's what makes Super Mario Galaxy really great, is that, like, yes, I like 3D World better, but I think that if Super Mario 3D Land and Super Mario 3D World bug you because they play too much like 2D Mario, and it's just like, I think that Super Mario Galaxy is a perfect mid-ground, because it's like, it's so 3D Mario, but it's so 2D Mario at the same time, with like how linear it is, and like the power-up selection. And I think that Super Mario Galaxy 2, as much as I'm like, this spawned Nintendo being like, reusing ideas. This was the first game where it was like, this was their first game where it was like really unoriginal. Like, as much as I think it spawned that, I think that Super Mario Galaxy 2 really did improve on Super Mario Galaxy a whole lot. I do think that it's really cool that Yoshi gets his own power-ups too. And just like the Cloud Flower is super cool. I think that in the future they should definitely add like more flower power-ups, because overall I like Super Mario Galaxy expanding on things, because it's like, I think that they should continue with like these little like trends when it comes to power-ups, you know? Like, I like how they're like, okay, we have Super Mushroom and 1-Up Mushroom. What about Bee Mushroom or Boo Mushroom? It's like, or Spring Mushroom. It's like, they have like these basic power-ups that are like of a certain type. It's like, okay, Fire Flower, Ice Flower, and then it's like, okay, but what about Cloud Flower? It's like, it is just so cool, in my opinion, that the Super Mario Galaxy games took like the basic power-up type of like flowers and mushrooms that the series had used before, and made like completely different and unique ones. Because like, it does just kind of throw me off guard, the way that like previous games had introduced power-ups that were so completely different from what they'd done before. And I think that it is just, yes, it's less creative, but there's something charming about like, oh look, it's a new mushroom power, because it's something we recognize, but it's something new as well. And I think that like Cape Feather, it's like, okay, why is there like a feather here? And I get that like that was what Tanuki Suit used as well. But like there aren't enough feather power-ups to justify a pattern, if that makes sense, in my opinion. Like, I think that the feather power-ups are just sort of like weird, because we have like enough flowers in the series for people to realize that there's like a flower theme with Mario, and we definitely have enough mushrooms to realize for people to realize there's a mushroom theme. And I think that mushrooms are like the most dominant type of power-up, because you got like Mini Mushroom, Mega Mushroom, Super Mushroom, 1-Up Mushroom, Poison Mushroom, Spring Mushroom, Bee Mushroom, Boo Mushroom, Rock Mushroom, and like there are just a lot of mushrooms. And like there's not as many flowers, but I still think it is more well established. Like, flowers are a theme with power-ups than like feathers. And I think it's strange that like feathers are associated with like, I don't know. I guess there's some like, I haven't read up on my Japanese like origins of like Tanuki and stuff, so I'm sure there is like a correlation between like between like feathers and Tanuki. But what is really interesting to me is that like the Tanuki suit you didn't even get them in the source material. In like the first game to have a Tanuki suit, the Tanuki suit wasn't even obtained from a feather, and then like the raccoon suit just faded into obscurity, because in the first two games, like in the first game that had like raccoon and Tanuki suit, they were different things. Like the Super Leaf gave you the raccoon suit, while the Tanuki suit gave you the Tanuki suit. That is to say, Super Leaf turned you into Raccoon Mario, while the Tanuki suit turned you into Tanuki Mario. But then, over time, what happened that was very odd was that the Super Leaf came back, but then gave you Tanuki Mario, rather than Raccoon Mario. Like, Raccoon Mario just sort of disappeared, and was never heard from again, while Super Leaf ended up giving you the more powerful variant of the power-up it originally gave you. It is very interesting. And then you have like the whole thing of like, that was introduced of like, Super Leaf gives Luigi Kitsune suits, and it's like, it's very interesting how the Super Leaf has changed over time, and how there are like, at this point, multiple versions of the Super Leaf, and some people call it Tanuki Leaf. Like, there's such a weird like evolution of the Super Leaf over games, because it's like what power up it gives you, what suit it gives you has changed, and it's like changed multiple times. It changes multiple times, and it's how like different things. It's like, this is what a Super Leaf looks like. Now this is what a Super Leaf looks like. And in some games it looks like this, and in some games it looks like that, and in some games it gives you this thing, and in some games it turns you into this, and it's like, it is really confusing, the Super Leaf. Like, the whole Super Leaf debacle, where it just, like, keeps changing, is honestly very strange. But I like where we are now, where the Super Leaf gives you a Tanuki suit. I think that is the simplest way of doing it. However, I just, like, it does, I do miss Raccoon Mario. I do think it's weird that, like, instead of going with, like, the Super Leaf gives you, instead of staying with the one that everybody would know, like, Super Leaf gives you Raccoon Mario, they instead transferred over to Super Leaf gives you Tanuki Suit, because, like, how many people, while playing through Super Mario Bros. 3, actually found the Tanuki Suit? Like, people would recognize Raccoon Mario. If they kept going with Raccoon Mario, then people would recognize it. But the fact of the matter is, instead of continuing on with this fact that people know at, like, the first level of Super Mario Bros. 3, that, like, oh yeah, Super Leaf gives you Raccoon Mario. Instead of staying with that, they changed it so the Super Leaf gives you the Tanuki Suit, which is a power-up that less people would know about. It seems like such an odd choice. But anyway, where I was before, where I was talking about, Super Mario Odyssey. Let's circle back to Super Mario Odyssey. Because, I do like the bosses, aside from the Broodals. I do think it's very good when, like, I do think it's, like, 3D games are definitely much better when it comes to creating, like, unique and interesting bosses, because obviously you just have more to work with in the 3D games. There's, like, just more space to work with, which allows you to, and, like, another whole dimension to work with, which gives you, like, new opportunities to make, like, new mechanics that can be used in a boss battle. So definitely, like, the boss battles in 3D Mario are just generally more interesting. And while I do not like the Broodals, I will say that, like, some other boss fights in Super Mario Galaxy mechanically are just really good. Like, I will always, like, pretty much I'm just gonna say it, every 3D Mario game has good boss fights. Like, I don't like Odyssey that much, and even though I will say, that game's boss fights, still fire. Still awesome. But, like, I will say that once again, we have, like, this uninspired sort of, like, I don't get the thing with Wigglers, quite honestly. I think it's quite odd that, like, there's tropical Wigglers in that game, and then there's also a Wiggler boss. And it's like, Mecha Wiggler does not look like a Wiggler. So I will cut them some slack, because Mecha Wiggler is, like, Mecha Wiggler in design is very different from your average Wiggler. But it is still a Wiggler, which I find odd that they, like, made Wiggler enemies, and then they made a Wiggler boss that was completely different from those Wiggler enemies. And I think that there are so many Mario enemies you could have worked with and made new variants of, to the point where I don't understand why one kingdom has one kind of Wiggler, and then another kingdom has a completely different kind of Wiggler that is a boss. It just seems very odd to me, and like I said, lacks creativity, in my opinion. I think that it's interesting that they brought Fuzzies back. I will always be a fan of Fuzzies because I played Super Mario 3D Land when I was very young. Obviously, I've said that before, and I have nostalgia for Fuzzies. But, like, I think that I wish that they weren't used as much, because I feel like, also just, like, there are so many new enemies in Mario Odyssey, and I think that if those enemies were just around more, then it would make things more interesting. Because with all the new enemies they introduced, you're still running into, like, Fuzzies and Goombas so often. And it's just, like, I know that people know these enemies, so, like, from the game design and advertising standpoint, it's good to, like, keep bringing them around, keep, like, showing them. But, like, I just wish that Uproots and, like, Gushins weren't just, like, a one-kingdom thing. I wish that, like, these new, interesting enemies in Super Mario Odyssey were more spread around the world, rather than just, like, oh, here's a new enemy in one kingdom anyway, off we go, we're never gonna see this again. And it's like, yeah, you see them in, like, Darker Side, when you see them on, like, Dark Side, and, like, Darker Side, some of the things come back, but it's still, like, I wish that they were more, like, they populated places more, because it's weird that, like, it's weird to me that, like, Goombas are in so many kingdoms, but Uproots are only, like, naturally found in one. You know, it's like, it's weird that they introduce these new species that are so much less common, so much less common than already pre-established species. Like, it makes sense from a game design standpoint and an advertising standpoint that, like, the enemies you know from previous games appear more often in the game. However, it doesn't make much sense from, like, an ecological standpoint, I guess, that, like, they introduce these new enemies. Ecological? Is that the right word? like, like, looking at what lives where. Like that, whatever science that's called. Like, I guess that is science of, like, ecosystems, so I suppose that, like, ecological might be correct. Maybe, possibly, I don't know, I've never been that good at science. But, like, it doesn't make sense from whatever point of view that is, in my opinion. That being said, my throat is getting really tired, so I'm gonna take a drink. Okay. I think that some of the powder from one of like vitamins I was taking earlier today got into the water, and so it tasted really weird on the back end. But point is, I'm a lot more refreshed now. Maybe it tasted a bit strange, but I'm more refreshed, which is a good thing. So now I can talk a little bit more. I will wrap up this episode because yeah, my throat is really starting to bug me. And I think that, and we also at the 30-minute mark, so I might as well. But, before I do, I want to just say that, like, Broodals, overall, are just, like, really weird to me. I do like Madame Brood mechanically more than the others, because she seems interesting. Like, all the others resort to attacking you with, like, hats. And I get that, like, the whole thing is, like, hats. But I feel like it's better explained with the Koopalings. Like, the reason why I prefer the Koopalings is simply because, like, hold on a minute, what did I just do? There we go. Sorry, guys. Just accidentally pressed a button on my keyboard that I probably shouldn't have. I forgot what she's sending out. So, oh, it's a Nina Queen. That is super effective on me. Let's switch out. But, yeah. I do prefer the, Koopalings just because, like, I feel that with them it's better established because there's no, like, doubting, like, why they can do this and why they can do that. It's like, with the Broodals, maybe I'm being stupid for searching for an explanation in a kid's game, but it just seems so weird to me that, like, oh, Stuart's hat just, like, moves around the stage by itself, Topper's hats multiply, it just, and, like, Harriet throws bombs out of her hair. It's, like, all these weird things that are, like, so, like, where did the bombs come from? Where did all those extra hats come from? How did Topper go into his hat and then come out of this one? Like, it is so much easier to... It is so much harder to pick apart what the Koopalings do because they have magic wands. Like, anything that Koopalings do that doesn't make sense, you can just explain away by being like, oh, it's magic. With the Broodals, you don't really have that explanation. You don't really have the liberty of that explanation. It's just like, why does his hat have saw blades in it? I don't know. With the Broodals, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like, at least I can look at Madame Brood and be like, this is an interesting boss fight that makes sense. She has a chain chomp, she walks it around, you possess the chain chomp, and you throw it at her face. Like, at least that makes sense. Like, oh, she has a chain chomp. I know what a chain chomp is. I understand what she's doing here. But the other ones, it's like, what is... Like, with Topper, it just evolves into what the heck is happening. Especially with, like, the dark side, where it's just so chaotic, and he's got, like, so many hats flying around the stage. It's just like, you keep jumping on him, like, you will never be touching the ground. With, like, the moon gravity. And then you have, like, all these hats flying around below you. And it's really funny, and it can make it really difficult if you don't, like, deal with him quick, because then there are just so many hats around the stage, like, you just can't land. It's like fighting, like, Jigglypuff or Kirby in Smash Bros. Like, they just won't let you land. But, I think it is really funny, and it does make it more challenging, but it still is, like, just, why? Like, the Broodals just leave me going, why, in those boss fights? And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that they actually made, like, sense. I do like Nuzlocke. I think it is a nice innovation on that one boss from, like, Super Mario 64, where you had to, like, hit the... I think his name was iRock, because he's made of rock, and he has eyes on his hands. But you had to, like, hit the eyes. And I think that is a good innovation on that, because once again, it is a boss with large hands and made of rock that go after you. His hands float after you, and he's like, and he's found in the desert world. I don't know if I already said that, but oh, we got a thunderstone. That's interesting. But like, it does remind me of that, and I think that it's good. And I think that callback was purposeful. Like, there's enough in common. iRock and Nuzlocke have enough in common to the point where I think that was done purposefully. But like, I do really like Nuzlocke's boss fight, and I think that is much more interesting than Irox because he's like got jewels. He like pounds the ground and the icicles or like jewels or whatever they are fall from the sky, and that's where Bowser gets like the binding band, and it's like, why would a wedding ring be that big? It's because it's Knuckletech's ring. I think that Knuckletech is really cool, and like I said, like other bosses too, like Cookatiel and like whatever the octopus guy's called. He's got like this really hard to pronounce French name, I'm sure. But Monsieur Mollusk, I think that's what his name is called. I think that's what his name is. But yeah, like a lot of boss fights in Super Mario Odyssey are really freaking good. But I just don't like the brutals, and like I said, the punishment in that game is just like not enough for me. And just like I wish the new enemies of the game appeared more often. But other than that, like yeah. Mario Odyssey, not worth the replay, but it was definitely fun the first time around. Once again, I mean no hate by saying that Odyssey is not my favorite, it's just my opinion. But, yeah, now that that's over, now that I'm done with my whole rants, thank you so much for watching EV Clan. This is Alex Espion, signing off.